Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have so many options when it comes to the draft. Pick number 3. An automatic that they know who would be the selection there, or could there be some growing pains for one young Ace Bailey? We dive into that and other possibilities coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that we have a conversation after, as you've seen in the last couple of episodes, talking about the easy plug of landing the first overall pick and taking Cooper Flagg, the easy selection of Dylan Harper and what that would mean to have a point guard in the backcourt for a generation of Nets fans that have not seen that type of talent consistently. Now we get to pick 3, Doug. And while I think we're both going to agree it's Ace Bailey, it's not as clear cut about what that would mean and what the future would look like for Brooklyn and that selection if they land 3rd in the lottery.
Yeah, this is where it does feel like with Ace Bailey, consensus starts to drift away. I still think he's probably consensus top 3. But I think it can shift down. He's the first one where you see depending on where you look, he falls possibly a little bit. Now I will say, conversely, there's somewhere other people have him too, right? So I think this is where among the top 3 guys, the the opinions start to vary a little bit, and there's a widening gap in like what the opinion is. I think like no one has Dylan Harper lower than 3, and most people have him at 2. But there are some spots that have Ace Bailey at like 5 or 7, right? And so now it's not all, everywhere, but and mostly he's 3, and I think it averages out at 3. But I think for obviously for Cooper Flagg, the mode and the average are 1, and I think with Dylan Harper, the mode and the average or the mode and the mean are 2. With Ace Bailey, it's like the probably both, and then the range is just more. Right, so like the range on those 2 guys is like no more than 1. For Ace Bailey, and for Cooper Flagg it's 0. But for Ace Bailey, it just starts to differ. So I think it's an interesting topic. I think that still, where the Nets are concerned, that this is probably where the being super pumped continues, and then after this it kind of drops.
Yeah.
Right, I think pick the top 3 picks. The Nets are, I think, 9%. Let's just double check here. Got this wrong yesterday. 9.4. Yeah, 9.4 chance to get the number 3 pick. 9.2 for 2, and 9 flat for pick overall. So 27-ish percent chance to land in this top 3. But I do believe that stopping with Ace Bailey is where we would I think top 3 Nets fans would all kind of gather around, do a group hug, and be like, we did it. I think after this is where you would start to see some searching for, differing opinions on where the guys are. So anyway, we can talk Ace Bailey, but I'm just trying to lay the landscape for sort of how things are shaping up going into the lottery.
Yeah, I do think that we'll talk about it on the back end of this episode because we've done it with these selections, right? But what if, right? If you could trade for player X, would you have that conversation? It's only going to grow larger here at 3. And then to your point, as we move beyond 3, then I think it gets really interesting. Now, we've already talked about how, for the most part, how deep the draft class is. Teams are going to build their boards the way they build them and probably won't feel compelled to move out of them. But you never know. Things happen. When it comes to Ace Bailey, I'll just point out, even before we get into it, this is probably, at least from what I've seen, the first player out of these top 3. And this isn't even a game thing. This isn't projecting how he'll grow and evolve as a player. This is the is he 100% at under 19 years old at the time of the draft? And as a lot of these guys are young, but there's been some consensus that the growing pains around his attitude, which is such a, I hate to have that on the list of things you talk about with him, but supposedly there's some talk that is he going to be a guy that comes in and is ready to grind and develop? And is he going to be, if you're picking the top 3, is he going to be a guy you attach your franchise to and say, he's our cornerstone piece? I think there's a lot of names we could point to, and I'm not associating Ace Bailey with any of them, but there's a lot of names in draft classes past where you go, the talent is so good, we love it, and then maybe 3-4 years later, still on the same team, maybe on a new team, you reflect back and say, right, there was one part of it, which was, can he handle the load of being that guy for a franchise. Ace Bailey probably has a little bit of that question around him.
Yeah, I think so. I think he still has less questions. And let's just reframe this for one more second. If this was last year's draft, he would go number one overall, right? So I think we said that about Dylan Harper too, and I think we can say that about Ace Bailey here too. Like this was if he was eligible for last year's draft of this, he'd be consensus number one, and we'd be moving on. Now we might be talking about what the ceiling is or something like that, but sometimes when depending on sort of where you get thrown in with the rest of the talent is where the conversation starts to be a little trickier. But if it was like him or Zach Rizaj, it'd be Ace Bailey, no doubt about it. Like forget about it. And coming out of high school, he was he at that time was a consensus number 2 overall player in the land. Like he was Cooper Flagg, then Ace Bailey. It was like a 1-2 with actually conversations like, oh, would he ever supplant Cooper Flagg? I mean, those conversations are over, but there was just to kind of nod to the idea that there was a time when this was discussed, like less than a year ago. Okay. Yeah. And I think when you look at him in terms of just like overall NBA makeup, like he has kind of everything you need, right? He's huge. He's 6'10". The wingspan, I think is 7'1". Let me double check that. He's got okay size, but you can tell by the frame that he's probably going to end up filling out like a decent amount if he wants to. He's still super young at 18. He's an elite shot creator. And part of that's because of his size, but he's also got like that sort of standard fluidity that you would want from a guy like this. Like he is not like an offensive engine type because it's kind of all shots and not a lot of other stuff when it comes to the offensive part of the game. But like the ability to get your own shot, the ability to be probably efficient enough at the NBA level, the ability to just score over NBA defenses and be able to break down NBA defenses from a shot diet standpoint, like he has all that. And so I think if you're like going, these super high best case scenarios for him, I mean, I've seen him like comp to like Tracy McGrady. I think that's crazy, but these guys, people threw Durant out there early on in it too. But like guys like Brandon Miller, Andrew Wiggins went number 1. Like these guys that have the size, have fluidity in their game, can score, and you can pretty much look at it and see that it's going to translate to the NBA level. I think like those boxes are completely all checked for him. There are other question marks, but on the scoring and size side, I don't think that there's a lot to like wonder about for those two components with the understanding that there just are more components to this.
Yeah, of course. Listen, 46% from the field in 30 games this past season at Rutgers, shot 30, almost 35%, 34, almost 35% from beyond the arc on nearly 5 shots per game as well. So like that part of it is great. And I know that you didn't make it and some people say it, and you always look for NBA comps, right? You're tall, lean, Kevin Durant. Okay. Like, there's a big difference between, especially from a ball handling standpoint and like off the dribble work that Ace Bailey would needing to be doing to get into those comps. There's a reason why it's not just the length of Kevin Durant that makes him so potent on the offensive end. It's also the ability to work into the paint, penetrate, create space for himself, right? Little step back off 1 foot floater on the elbow. Like all of those elements matter. Now, am I willing? Am I excited if the Brooklyn Nets end up landing in the 3rd spot and take Ace Bailey because there's some projection that this guy can develop those areas of the game? Of course. The only difference here is, and I think you're right when it comes to his frame. I feel bad talking about Ace Bailey in some negative connotations relative to the way we talk about Cooper Flagg or have talked about Dylan Harper to start this. But if you're talking about the frame filling out, it's like it's all good as long as you see it starting to happen over that first season, those first 2 seasons, right? Now he's gonna be under 19, so you can talk about 2 years from now when he's still not quite 21 and what's the state of his game, where is he looking physically? So that's the interesting part. I think you have to be, just like we talk about with young players you take later in the first round or in the second round, even young prospects that you can always give a longer runway for. It's just the pressure will be there, right? There'll just be pressure on Ace Bailey to show some of those flashes. Yeah. The offensive game part of it, I think the penetration piece will be interesting at the NBA level when you talk about being more of a straight line attacker into the paint as opposed to having a little bit of more of that fluidity. And we talked about this with Cooper Flagg, right? Physical, get downhill, has kind of that side to side lateral quickness, get into the lane and also get around defenders. That's probably the first part of it. But if Ace Bailey comes in and can settle into the fact that I have the length to be able to at least get into the paint and then use my length and space to get my shot in the mid-range game, expand out to the 3-point range, yeah, guess what? Still all the same impact we talk about these other guys as far as opening up the floor for teammates, creating easy looks, easy opportunities, and plus matchups for a lot of teammates as well. That, I think, is as big a factor as anything when you talk about Ace Bailey. You have to have the requisite size and baseline skill set to say, yep, putting players around you is going to increase their value and increase our team value. I just, there's a little bit more with like, you're going to be very excited to see how he develops, as opposed to entering in the door with a Cooper Flag, even with a Dylan Harper, though he has questions about the shot and improving that. Different type of questions, maybe in terms of how you project Ace Bailey's development over the first 2 or 3 seasons of his career.
Yeah. Okay. There was a lot there. So I want to break that down. And I also want to just frame this within put this in the framework of where the Nets are too. And I want to make one more point about like Ace Bailey and like sort of the way we're talking about it. We'll get into that here in just one moment. Before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? You can turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub. The Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Love to hear that. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports, College Football 25, Call of Duty, and it's easy to stream your favorite shows. Maybe you want to jump in your favorite Xbox titles. You're not going to need your console in every room. Maybe it's not in front of your main setup. Maybe head into a hotel, family visits, just a bedroom. Fire TV Stick 4K makes it possible to keep playing from almost anywhere. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K. That's the 2nd generation. Fire TV Stick 4K Max, 1st and 2nd generation. And Fire TV Cube, 3rd generation. Once again, head on over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started.
All right. As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about spiking the odds, even if it's not for the first, even if it's not for the second, landing in the 3rd spot would certainly be an improvement over where the Brooklyn Nets currently stand. When we talk about the NBA draft upcoming May 12th, obviously we'll know exactly where the Brooklyn Nets are going to land. They currently sit there. When we talk about the odds, 6th position feels good for them, right? And there's a big difference too, by the way. I'll get back on the note about Ace Bailey before we talk about fit and future, but you mentioned it there. Big difference between being at 3 and then everything else is going to happen, which we're going to discuss going forward. But you just don't, while these guys are exciting, while you'd be happy to have any of them, there's a difference between the first 3 players listed on this draft board and then everybody else behind them, as enticing and as good and as impressive as they've been through their college career.
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong here. If they drafted Ace Bailey, he'd be the most exciting net on the team, like, by a lot.
Yeah.
like, by a lot. So I know it kind of sounds, it's like a shame that you have to talk about him compared to Flag and Dylan Harper, and you really don't, I guess. Maybe we're just choosing to do that. But if they drafted Ace Bailey, it would be like, he'd be the number 1 ticket. He'd be the number 1 jersey sold. He'd be the most exciting player on the team. We'd be talking about him for years. Like, yep. And just watching the development and sort of like either it kind of flashes right away, which I think it would to some degree, and then waiting to see if it became like a complete player, which is easily in his range of outcomes. So I think that like from an excitement level, it would be through the roof to be able to bring a guy like this in.
Of course.
Just because, you know, when we talk about kind of creating certain players in a lab, if you can make a 6'10" shooter with fluidity, like you are a lot of the way there. On some of these guys, like it's not all the way there. You still need now what you're hoping to happen is like, can they put these other pieces of the game together where it all fills out? Like, can they fill out of their body? Can they be sort of like dominant, sort of single game threats? Can they be good on the defensive end? Like Tatum became this, right? Like Jason Tatum is like, okay, it's everything. Like he's got everything, and I'm not making comparison to him. I'm just saying these like big wings that end up filling out, and now it's like absolutely game on championship level superstar. Ace Bailey for sure has that in his range of outcomes more than almost every other player in this draft. Like other guys, you kind of can maybe squint and see it outside of the top 2. And I'm not even positive like Dylan Harper's positively that guy. I think he's just like a much safer pick for sure than Ace Bailey is at this point.
Well, you know what?
There's a world where Ace Bailey has like there's a world where Ace Bailey has a considerably higher ceiling than Dylan Harper. And I think like that's not a hot take at all. Yeah, like he's
I think it's right to frame it that way.
Yeah, like you can see the Ace Bailey ceiling's way higher. The floor's way lower though, and that's the problem. Like the floor is lower because of the other parts. Like if you know the court vision doesn't really improve, if the defense doesn't really come around because there's like sort of effort issues, which I'm not even going to fault him for at Rutgers. I'm just like not 100% sure on it. But if it hits in the Cooper Flag territory for sure. And I think like that's sort of like, and that's the reason Nets fans, if they drafted him, the excitement would last years because that could happen for him.
Oh yeah, 19 points per game this season, 7.7 rebounds, assist and a half almost, a block and a half almost per game, and over a steal. But to your point there, it's like that is the right way to frame it because, and when you're picking that high in the draft, guess what? Again, that's why it's like getting the spike in the number one, getting Cooper Flag. That'd be the easiest route to go here. Let's just get the guy that everyone believes is the best and has the best chance to have the highest ceiling and also hit it. Maybe to your point, maybe Ace Bailey is as high of a ceiling potential, but what you don't want, what you don't want to have, we can have happen is land in the third spot, take Ace Bailey, and for no other reason than just doesn't pan out, but because that floor might be a bit lower than a Dylan Harper, turn around 3 years from now and say, we missed on Ace Bailey. We spiked the third overall pick and it didn't work out. And by the way, Dylan Harper, as you say, his range is a little bit, is certainly tighter than Ace Bailey, but he also has to make sure that he comes pretty darn close to what we believe the safe ceiling is for him. And that's a tricky part about this when it comes to these drafts. You're going to take the best player available, consensus on the board, but you also need to have confidence that he's going to be a hit. And that's probably the concern here, if you want to call it that, with Ace Bailey is we draft third overall. It doesn't kind of matter that we have 3 other first-round picks. One of them can hit 2, but if your top pick, if that first-round pick, that top 10 pick the Nets end up with, wherever they end up, if it's not a hit, it's the same thing as every other year when they haven't had a lottery pick and maybe a cornerstone player to build around, right? That ends up being, late first round picks. One of them hits, you develop them. It's great. It's having the conversations like with Nick Claxton, like with Cam Thomas, right? These are good players. Cam Thomas maybe has some greatness in him, but it's still a reflection of on where he was drafted based on the idea that, maybe their ceiling isn't so high. Maybe, Cam Thomas actually is an interesting comp, like with Dylan Harper as a background first-round pick, where you say, hey, range of outcomes is probably like tighter in terms of, come in, he'll be a scorer, but will he be a guy that's going to take over as a starting rotation player and be one of your 2 best players on your roster, right? Now, I'm not comparing that with Dylan Harper as far as his expectations, but tighter margin. Ace Bailey? Yeah, maybe it's the same thing when you talked about Nick Claxton years ago. Doesn't have the ceiling of Ace Bailey and these top guys, but probably had a wider range of, if he fills out his frame and if he figures out the offense a bit more, now we have a 2-way versatile player. When you invest this high in the draft, though, it has to be that you feel like this guy is going to get there on those developmental traits.
Yeah, I think that, like, again, if we're drafting now, I actually think it would be close between Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey for me. Like, I think because I think, again, just
size,
because of the ceiling, yes, and you just kind of like need one of these guys to win it all. And if you get like Tracy McGrady type guy, then, or Tatum type guy, and Tatum's not a great comp, but like you just can go everywhere with that.
Yeah.
I still would take Harper because I think it's still safer, and I still think he has like a pretty high ceiling. But it's like it's a test. Bailey's great. Like, he's awesome. Like, he can score with the best of them. He can help defend. Like, he can. I mean, part of that's because he's just big and athletic and like, the on ball whatever. But like, help defense when you're 6'10" with a 7'2" whatever it is wingspan. Like, you can do a lot of different stuff. So I think it would actually be pretty. I don't think it'd be close. I guess it's closer then, but only because I'm like, well, if you really start dreaming, I don't think I can like dream all the way to the top on Dylan Harper, but I can on Ace Bailey. And I think that's why, again, like, just get in the top 3. If they can get in the top 3, this is why you're kind of like, oh, we're good. Because we'll tell 3 different stories, but they'll all be very cool. They'll all be very cool stories. Right. It's just like, it's starting tomorrow at 4 where we're like, because we might even disagree. We'll pick a guy and do it, but I think we even right now maybe disagree about who that next guy should be. Whereas with Ace Bailey, we're not disagreeing, I don't think.
No, 100%. Coming up here in a second. Let's pose that question, though, then. Third? Second? Could there be a divisive decision for Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets, regardless of whether they land in that second or third spot potentially? Roster impact, clearly an interesting conversation there. And then a little note about those NBA playoffs. The Detroit Pistons desperately battling to prove Doug and I right. We'll do that here in just one moment. All right, my friends, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the draft, walking through this process. You can go back and see our conversation about Cooper Flag at 1, about Dylan Harper at 2. But before we talk about roster impact, which I actually think is kind of interesting when it comes to potentially drafting Ace Bailey, is there a world where we think that on draft night, like you said, hey, safer bet, impact player has been kind of that consensus 2 spot, but Sean Marks maybe sees Ace Bailey, sees the size, sees the shot, and goes, yeah, we'll pull the trigger on the 6'10" guy who's going to fill out. And frankly, maybe we think that we know factually it's easier to find backcourt floor general type players, even with a little bit more size like Dylan Harper has. It's easier to find those guys as a mold of player than it necessarily is to find a 6'10 player with a shooting touch that you think can develop into that type of impact player that it's a lot easier to put pieces, different pieces around them as opposed to the other way.
It's considerably safer to take Dylan Harper, and I think Marks is would play it safe like that. And they probably just
being like, I kind of got to play this one safe here if I'm in that 2 spot.
And I just think it is cleaner. Like he just showed Dylan Harper, I think showed more. Like he just showed more across everything than Ace Bailey did. And I think that it's like safer and probably just correct. It was more just like a testament to how good Ace is that whatever. But in terms of if I'm Sean Marks and I just kind of no, he's never going to get fired. But the pick that doesn't get Dylan Harper doesn't seem like a kind of pick that gets you fired. Now, Ace Bailey, if you reached on him and consensus was flipped, then you are maybe in that territory, right? So,
about this before though, Nets get the 3rd overall pick and they draft Jeremiah Fears. It's Sean Marks isn't getting fired. I mean, literally, bottom line, this guy's not going anywhere. God. He's staying no matter what choices he makes.
It's kind of like the Brandon Miller Scoot discussion. These guys aren't the same players. Although I mean, maybe Ace is a little closer to Brandon Miller, but Dylan Harper, I don't think is like Scoot, but where that discussion became, it's you're going to take the big wing who can score. You're going to take maybe the guy who's a bit flashier, at least out of the box, and Scoot Henderson. And I think it was trending like the Brandon Miller side that was looking better, and he got hurt at the end. He got hurt this year, so it's a little hard to tell. But anyway, I think that no, I think if they had 2, you got to go. You stick with Harper. 3, I think you chalk Ace Bailey, and then like I said, after that it gets murkier. And I think that it gets the work. I do think I'll tell you right now. It's not a terrible outcome because it's still a high pick, but the 4 pick would be, we should save this for tomorrow. The 4 pick would be classic Nets because it's a 3. It's the top 3 are such on an elite level, I think, considered for most people. And then at 4, there'd be disagreement about who it should be. Is it Edgecombe? Who is
speculation, debate all summer, and then find, what's he look like in summer league and training camp? Everything would be under the microscope every single
because there will have been other guys too.
Yeah,
Rick was right. Because let's put it this way: if you draft 3 at Ace Bailey, no one's ever going to think you should have drafted somebody else, or most people won't. Right? Starting at 4, though, if someone between 5 and 8 hits, and you could have taken them, and your 4 pick doesn't. That is a story people will tell forever because it won't seem as obvious. Whoever the 4th pick is in the draft is will get compared to, because right now if it's VJ Edgecombe, which I'm not even positive it's going to be him, then you have Trey Johnson, you have Knippel. I said Nipple, but he was the one that said that. Pronounced that way. Well, I'll say my thing. The reason I said that is because I watched something one time where he was like, no, this is how you pronounce it. It's your thing. And he was saying, but Knippel, Fears, Molly Watch, these guys, I think, will jostle around a little bit. And if, let's say the Nets take Edgecombe, and then any one of the guys I just mentioned, really hits, people will be like, I knew it. I don't think they would do that with Bailey, even if Bailey flamed out for some reason, which I don't think he will, because it will just kind of be it's obvious you need to take him. Anyway, so long story short, top 3. Let's just get to the top 3, and then we can at least kind of rest easy with how the decisions unfold.
And it's interesting too. So the other part of this conversation, we've talked about this with the other players, and it's so much easier with Cooper Flag. And then when it came to Dylan Harper, it was very easy to say, well, the Nets have needed this. They need to have a floor general, a guy with size in the backcourt, and we know how that impacts as well. I mean, I will say one thing that would make it instantly exciting. I mean, in order to be exciting to get Ace Bailey, but it'd be really exciting to think about having Noah Clowney and his development, and then bringing Ace Bailey into the mix there. Now all of a sudden you are doing what it's hard to sometimes accomplish, which is get young players with size, with shooting capability that have, Noah Clowney defensively, still a lot of things to see there. He's not, the Nick Claxton type of version on that end of the court to this point. But if I got 2 guys that are 6'10 and have length and have range, now you can think about the way you build out your team. So I just find that interesting from a draft perspective. Then where you go is you look through the rest of this draft class and say, okay, how do we pick out a couple of players here? Maybe you look to free agency and you think, how do we best benefit having 2 guys in the front court like Noah Clowney and now like Ace Bailey? it makes me think about what the Spurs did in the offseason. We're like, okay, we got Wembanyama. We're going to go with Chris Paul. Why? We just need a dude that knows how to run it, right? Let's make everything consistent and easy. I think the Brooklyn Nets will have a high focus on that no matter what, but it probably elevates when you bring in a player like this to say, we need to make sure that we pair him with someone that makes this an easy transition to the pro game as he develops some of these key areas.
Yeah, that's a good. We've been point guard maximalists for a while here on the show about like how important we think it is.
We wouldn't have to be, if the Nets would just have some of these guys, it'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's just how important it is to like have someone who can kind of be a connector, and Ace Bailey would definitely benefit from a guy like that. I think everyone, unless you're the point guard, basically everyone benefits from that. I think, yeah, right? Like, and some more than others, but you just need to have. A good player. I think the Nets, between this draft and probably with the cap space that they have, are just going to have like a functional team. Like, I think there's a world where, well, we'll see how the draft unfolds, but they're almost for sure going to just be more talented next year. Like, just by the nature of they were so talent deficient, at least like in the second half of the year. And between these draft picks, even if they pick 6 or something like that, like they're still just going to be more talented next year. I think now younger and maybe the talent is harder to maximize in the early part of it, but just like overall talent and athleticism, I mean, they can't help but be more of those things because they had to be one of the the least athletic team in the league this year, right? Like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, they just like nobody.
I'm like doing the math.
Nobody with any juice.
Looking over the roster.
They kind of made the system work, and Cam Thomas, when he's on, is there, but like no one thinks of Cam Thomas as like super athletic and like super, twitchy and like just kind of like flying all over the place. He's
you're right. Yeah.
Absolute A+ premium scorer and can do it with some of the best guys in the league. But no one's like, oh, he's super athletic or whatever. I think they're just going to have more of that just based on this just draft alone. So I don't know. I guess I'm just excited in general, and I'm quietly hedging on even on like the 6 or 7 pick that's still going to be better than last year. But come on, let's get one of these big guys. Come on.
I'll tell you right now, and you said like, of course they'll be better, and I think you'll see, regardless of, I shouldn't say that, not regardless of where, but if they spike into one of these top 3 picks, obviously with Cooper, Flagg, or anybody else, but if they spike into the top 3, it does, and we'll talk about this maybe after we work through some of these. Maybe we'll even pause before pick number 4 and have this very specific discussion, which is how does landing in any of those top 3 spots impact the way the Brooklyn Nets not just approach the rest of the first round in this draft, but then also free agency. They have money to spend. So if they were to get up there in those top 3 picks, I think, again, you see a different mentality about where do we spend our money? What are we willing to go out and do to make sure that this new young player and the overall young core has the best chance for success? It doesn't mean you're sitting here saying, oh, now we'll be a 500 team and we're going for the play-in tournament. It doesn't matter what the outcome of the year is, but we talked about this during this season and how important it was to look at the development of these players and make sure that guys were on track to take the next step in years 2 or in years 3. Likewise, I expect Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets, if they land in one of these top 3 picks, you will see them invest in veteran free agency, even though it's not the sexiest market out there. I think you'll see them ensure that every young player at a position has a good veteran there to help kind of shape and mold and showcase it. You get Dylan Harper? Let's talk about what veteran point guard you'd like to have on this roster. Maybe, not going to be D'Angelo Russell. I don't think he's quite that guy, but you'll find players to pair with them. And I think that's going to be something interesting to watch after, of course, the Brooklyn Nets land a top 3 pick.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Like I said, we're going to get into pick number 4 tomorrow. We also are going to have a Locked On Nets announcement coming either Friday or Monday. So make sure you tune in for that as well. Support the show. Subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube. Subscribe over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. I think those are the only 2 places. Just hit that subscribe button. Number 1 way to help the show.
That's true. The other thing that's true is you only do good work when you're taking risks and pushing yourself. And that is one Sally Hawkins.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. Back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.